In the heart of the city, tucked between the sterile walls of a public hospital, there was a thrift store. It was an unassuming space, no larger than a janitor's closet, where families donated the clothing and belongings of their loved ones who had passed away. The items were sold to help fund the hospital, a practical solution to the clutter of grief. My wife Emily always had a peculiar disdain for that place. "Don't ever buy anything from there," she said once. "It's tainted." She didn't elaborate, but the look in her eyes left no room for argument. I didn't think much about it until the day I found the painting. It wasn't prominently displayed, just propped against the wall behind a stack of faded books and chipped ceramic figurines. The frame was wooden, the varnish cracked and peeling, and the image itself, a desolate house under a stormy sky, had an unsettling allure. The colors were muted, the brushstrokes erratic, yet it drew me in. Without thinking, I bought it. Emily was out when I brought it home. I hung it in the living room above the mantel, where the somber tones seemed to complement the dark wood furniture. When she came back, she paused in the doorway, her gaze locking onto the painting. "Where did that come from?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Just something I found," I replied, avoiding specifics. Her expression hardened, but she didn't press further. The first incident happened the following morning. I found the painting on the floor, the frame twisted as though it had been yanked down. The nail was still in place, and the wire on the back of the frame was intact. I assumed I'd hung it poorly and remounted it, making sure it was secure. "You should take it down," Emily said that evening, watching me with a wary expression. "It doesn't belong here." Her words irritated me. It was just a painting after all. "It's fine," I replied. The following days brought more disturbances. The painting would tilt no matter how straight I adjusted it. The frame fell twice more, each time in the dead of night, startling us awake. Emily grew increasingly agitated, and so did I. The house felt heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, always circling back to the painting. One night, after another heated exchange, I decided to take a closer look at the piece. Under the dim glow of a table lamp, I noticed details I hadn't before. Faint scratches on the frame's back, like claw marks, and a signature in the corner of the canvas, partially obscured by grime. The name, E. Rowan, meant nothing to me, but it fueled a growing unease. Still, I couldn't bring myself to remove it. There was something almost defiant in its presence, as though it dared me to let it remain. By the second week, the tension in our home was unbearable. Emily avoided the living room altogether, and when she wasn't avoiding me, her words were clipped and biting. I tried to convince myself it was stress, work, the painting, whatever. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. Something about the painting had changed. It seemed darker, the storm clouds heavier, the house more foreboding. Then came the night I woke to the sound of breaking glass. Rushing downstairs, I found the painting face down on the floor, the frame shattered. Emily stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "You need to get rid of it." Reluctantly, I agreed. The next morning, I loaded the painting into the car and drove back to the hospital. The thrift store was empty, save for an older woman behind the counter who eyed the painting warily as I placed it on the counter. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Here," I replied. "A couple of weeks ago." Her frown deepened. "We don't take paintings anymore." The statement caught me off guard. "But I bought it here," I insisted. She shook her head. "It wasn't supposed to be sold. It's best you take it back." Frustrated, I left it on the counter and walked out. I told myself it was over, that I'd done what Emily wanted. But when I got home, she was waiting for me, her expression one of fury and fear. "Why is it back?" she demanded. My blood ran cold. The painting was there, leaning against the wall in the living room. The shattered frame was gone. The next few days were a blur of escalating dread. Emily moved into the guest room, refusing to speak to me unless necessary. The painting, now untouched, seemed to dominate the space, its presence oppressive. I avoided the living room entirely, but I could still feel it, a gnawing awareness that bled into every corner of the house. One evening, while Emily was out, I decided to research the name on the painting. After hours of fruitless searching, I stumbled upon an article from a decade ago. Edward Rowan, a reclusive artist, had been institutionalized after being accused of a series of brutal murders. His works, known for their disturbing imagery, had been destroyed, all except one, which had disappeared after his death. My stomach churned. I stared at the screen, the implications sinking in. The painting wasn't just an object, it was a relic of something far darker than I'd imagined. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt amplified, every shadow a threat. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of footsteps. Groggy, I stumbled out of bed, my heart thudding as I realized they were coming from the living room. Emily stood in front of the painting, her back to me. Her hand was outstretched, almost touching the canvas. "Emily," I called softly. She didn't respond. I stepped closer. "Emily, what are you doing?" She turned then, her eyes vacant, her face pale. "It's calling," she murmured, her voice distant. I grabbed her arm, pulling her away. "You're not safe here," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. The painting had to be destroyed. I took it to the backyard, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. The flames roared to life, consuming the canvas. For a moment I felt a surge of relief, but when the fire died down, the painting remained, untouched and intact. Emily left that same day, refusing to stay in the house any longer. Alone, I felt the walls closing in. The painting was relentless, its presence a constant weight. I tried everything, burning, burying, even dumping it miles away, but it always returned, unscathed, and in its place above the mantel. The breaking point came when I woke to find a message scrawled across the wall beneath the painting. "Leave." I didn't need further convincing. I packed what I could carry and left the house that night, abandoning it and everything inside. Emily and I never spoke of it again, but I knew she blamed me for everything that happened. Months later, I drove past the hospital out of curiosity. The thrift store was gone, replaced by a plain wall. I asked a nurse about it and she told me it had closed abruptly, though no one knew why. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at the hospital's entrance and froze. Through the glass doors I could see it, the painting, propped against the wall, waiting. Some memories are better left behind, but others refuse to be forgotten. The painting became a rumor in the city, an urban legend whispered among hospital staff and visitors. Some said they saw its image shift, storm clouds swirling, lights flickering in the house's windows. Others swore they heard faint whispers when standing near it. I tried to forget, but every once in a while I'd catch myself wondering where it was, what it was doing now. It wasn't until years later, when I'd moved to another state, that I heard from Emily again. Her voice on the phone was strained, hesitant. "It's following me," she said. "What is?" I asked, though I already knew. She paused, her breath hitching. "The painting." "How? Did you take it?" "No, it found me." Her words haunted me for weeks, but she didn't call again. Part of me hoped she was mistaken, that her imagination had twisted some other mundane object into a nightmare. Yet deep down, I feared the truth. The painting wasn't bound by logic or location. It chose its victims, and once it did, escape was impossible.
Please subscribe for more stories.